This isn't a topic that I've covered extensively on my channel, but I think it's an incredibly important conversation to have. This idea of many studios, in this case Bethesda specifically that we'll be diving into, becoming a fractured and more distant memory of what it once was. These pioneers of not just some of our favorite IPs, but some genre-defining releases no longer holding that same credibility and weight that they once did, whether or not they're falling from their own hubris or just from corporate oversight that has drained the internal culture, the company direction shifting so much so that it's become unrecognizable, yes, to us fans, but also to those working internally at many of these companies. It's a story that we hear increasingly often as some of the old guard of these development studios become, well, old, and they've been here for quite a long time. We see it with Bungie, how they just recently got caught and admitted to stealing a indie small-time artist's work, and this is not the first. It's what, the fourth time they've been caught doing so? It's in discussion with BioWare, how we see and worry about what the future of Mass Effect might be as EA seemingly has drained the company of its culture as well. We see it with Rocksteady, inspiring titles, great titles like PlayStation Spider-Man, now being part of one of the biggest financial flops for the gaming division of Warner Brothers with the release of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I'm sure there's plenty of other examples that you can highlight, and it's often the saddest part is it's not usually the studio's fault. A lot of times it comes from this corporate envelopment of these companies that dissolves the culture that is or was once there.
I mean, everyone who's in my video left. And so I don't know what's left of the culture there, and I haven't heard good things.
And of course, the focus of today's video will be diving into Bethesda, where one of its former developers just had a recent interview where they talked about how they have zero desire to go and play Starfield, a game that came from the very studio that they once were proud to be a part of.
I wanted to ask what your opinion is of the direction that Bethesda has moved in.
Yeah, I don't like it. I think Bethesda is a victim of its own success.
It's funny, I think back to that term, that quadruple A terminology that Ubisoft was trying to push. They wanted to do it with Skull and Bones, and they wanted to do it with some of their other titles as well. And in hindsight, it might have been an apt description, not to exemplify the high budget and blockbuster quality and production value that went into making these games. God, no. It serves as an apt description, that additional A, to represent the corporatism that bleeds into a lot of these projects. The sanitization, as a term that we've heard thrown around more and more, for a lot of these AAA games that game after game has struggled with. Meanwhile, the indie scene has been blowing up with multiple Game of the Year worthy titles that have smaller team sizes, much smaller budgets, arguably higher production value, and just more value to players at a lower cost. AAA games now $80 that we're going to dive into. How is it going, everybody? My name is DeMarco, and I think this is a crucial conversation to have. Not because I want to celebrate the downfall of one of my most beloved studios, to celebrate the failure of one of my favorite IPs being the Elder Scrolls. In fact, quite the opposite. I've seen the comments, and I know I'm going to get them on this video, that whether it's BioWare or Bethesda, these studios are dead, that all the talent has left, and there's no hope, they're a shell of their former selves. But I would like to believe that anybody, even those making those comments, they want to see a Elder Scrolls game that once again can unify the Bethesda fan base, or whatever game or studio that you want to rally behind can once again be something to be proud of, to celebrate being a fan of these franchises. So today we're diving into Jonah Lobe. He was a former artist at Bethesda. He worked on games like Fallout 3, Oblivion, and Fallout 4. Jonah also made a really phenomenal documentary called You're Finally Awake, where he interviewed 9 developers who worked on Skyrim, all of which are no longer at Bethesda Game Studios. And at this point, I've seen many of these developer interviews, whether they left around, during, after the absorption of Bethesda into Microsoft, and there's a lot of similarities between every single one of these former developer interviews. Number one, that Bethesda is a victim of its own success.
Our own hubris caught up with us. You know, we had had so many, not just successes, but literal game of the years, like industry-wide accepted game of the years.
That they could do absolutely anything, when we know that for any studio, that's not the case. In Todd's own words, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. Doing everything being a major problem that I see with a lot of their recent releases that have stretched their games way, way too wide. How many times has it been discussed in relation to Starfield that it's as big as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle? And that's the concern, of course, for the Elder Scrolls 6. Number 2 is that Todd Howard is stretched too thin. Like Starfield itself, he's being pulled in too many different directions.
I mean, it definitely got a lot harder because he was a lot busier and, like, you know, needed to fly off to all these other studios and stuff.
And honestly, the truth is that he's less involved, but like towards the end of Fallout, well, actually, like towards Fallout 76 and then in Starfield, he was just way less involved with people. He'd come over everybody's desk. He'd walk around the whole studio, see what you're doing, come talk to you for a little bit, to all the developers, you know? So one of the reasons for me where I kind of like, kind of retired is I was like, you know, I missed Todd. I missed working with him, but it was hard. I get it. He's running this huge business. It grew tremendously. He was starting to get involved with other projects like, you know, Indiana Jones and other things and the shows and all that. And his attention was very scattered. Some of the people that kind of took his place, you know, they're not Todd. It takes a lot to be Todd.
Half because of the pandemic and half just because of necessary changes. You didn't get to interact with Todd as much anymore. And I've been blessed with the ability to pretty much walk into his office anytime I needed to and be able to have conversations with him. But when you're running 6 different studios and you've got a dozen projects, although usually only one really big one, going on at a time, you know, he's only one man. He doesn't have the face time to be able to do that anymore. So the lines of communication became a lot more rigid, of necessity.
While there is some debate to be had as to whether or not he should be the ultimate end-all be-all person, that Bruce Nesmith, in an interview that he did, announced that, yeah, everything still needs to run through Todd on one level or another. But at the end of the day, all of these decisions do need to escalate to one person. I think it's a matter of changing your internal processes to make that as efficient as possible. We could look at a project like Baldur's Gate 3, which had about 400 developers, around the 450 that worked on Starfield or that working under Todd at Bethesda. And as a result, it's possible Baldur's Gate 3 was one of the best games that we've gotten in years. It won Game of the Year, and yet why can't other games replicate that success with a similar team size? And number 3, and arguably the biggest one, is that the culture has changed. Every single developer that has talked about modern Bethesda has mentioned this exact same thing, that it's no longer what it used to be for a variety of reasons that we're going to dive into today. And each of these are a cause or a symptom of Bethesda ballooning in team size, something that's both a privilege to be a part of and yet something so destructive to a company that relies on finding this tightrope balance of passion versus realistic expectations versus funding growth in bigger games but remaining true to what made those older games great in the first place and not blowing them out of proportion in the wrong directions. When we look at successful titles now, Expedition 33 comes to mind. It stands out to me as one of the most massive surprises this year. I was incredibly excited about it to begin with, but in every instance, it has blown my expectations out of the water. It was made by 30 people. Many of these developers have had almost no experience working on games. I'm pretty sure the lead writer was someone who worked in finance, and it's been discussed how the composer had never worked on a video game before and was just found through SoundCloud. And yet this team was able to release a Game of the Year worthy nominee, and in my opinion, probably my personal Game of the Year. It rivaled that of modern AAA titles and exceeded many of them in a lot of ways, and it wasn't priced at the now accepted, I guess, by corporations, not necessarily by gamers, $80 price point, but instead it was priced at $50. Oblivion Remastered, well, it was a remaster, was a game that was made under similar circumstances. This much more small and concise and passionate team that was working towards a cohesive goal with limited resources and a limited budget that made a phenomenal Game of the Year winner as well. And I've talked in the past about titles like Space Marine 2 or The Blue Prince, which we'll honorably mention throughout today's video, but as every month goes by and as these types of releases continue to mount, it becomes less and less surprising surprising why they're so successful in comparison to these massive AAA projects with gargantuan budgets that are seemingly failing to find any kind of an audience. At least one that's comparable to the cost that it takes to make these games, let alone market them. In this interview done by AVV Gaming, and I highly recommend that you do go check it out yourself if you're interested, I'll leave a link down in the description, Jonah starts by discussing how when you're working on a smaller team, you really have the creative freedom to do a lot more. One of the first major differences. It doesn't mean that you can do anything.
I think one thing they did really well, I think this was helmed mostly by Todd, is say no a lot.
But if there's an idea and it fits within what's possible based on the game's scope and limitations that you're working within, then you have the authority to try to execute it, and with that comes a sense of ownership that's really important.
I made the Deathclaw for Fallout 4, and it's touched on in the documentary I did, where Leanne, an animator, says that, you know, in the intervening years since she left, she's grown to appreciate how much control she had. There was a lot rode on just your shoulders, but you had total control. You know, Leanne would do every single animation for the fire astronauts and every single animation for the dogs, but it meant that it was all hers. And I think that you get a greater sense of pride when you have a sense of ownership. You know, I can feel really good about Skyrim and Fallout and things like that because I own a piece of that.
I think it's pretty clear to see how this would inspire a developer to work harder, to spend more hours, not because they're forced to crunch to make a deadline, but because they're having a tangible impact that players experience firsthand. Jonah discusses how it was his idea to implement the Dragon Priest masks into the game, or to implement circlets, which is something so simple, but I can't imagine playing Skyrim without. When gaming credits are 20 minutes or often longer these days across 5 different studios in 3 different countries, it's just not possible to feel as though you have that same level of ownership.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the number of producers on Starfield is like more than the size of the team on Fallout 3.
Really?
Yeah.
So why should that junior artist stay and work extra hours to make this cool idea come to life when they know that somewhere in the totem pole, whether it's 5 or 6 or 7 levels of approval, if it even makes it that far to begin with, where someone is probably going to say no, and by the time you well know that you're going to get that no back, you probably could have made the whole idea work if you were a part of a smaller team. What's the motivation? What's the reason to go out and put in that level of effort when you're being told what you need to do? There's a lot more junior people who can't take that level of responsibility because they're part of these larger corporate structures.
I mean, it was ever more corporate when I worked there, and now it seems like, from what I've heard recently, like Microsoft is like running that show. So,
and they have more defined roles that lock them into performing a specific function versus those smaller studios where everybody's doing a little bit of everything. You can't say, hey, that's that person's job, because that person probably isn't there. So you need to take responsibility into your own hands. And with that comes a sense of pride.
I'm obviously one of those people who you can just be like, do this thing, and I'll do that thing, and I'll probably even get it done ahead of time or whatever. But some people need to be like, here's the thing, here's exactly when you need to finish it by, and then they need maybe more checking up on. So
now it's harder than ever to get in front of Todd, according to multiple former developers. According to Jonah, Todd would spend days in his office just playing the game they were working on, looking at the different aspects of it.
I was thinking about, the art over here, and the animators thinking about the animation, and designers are thinking about their quests. But he's really, you go into his office a lot, and he would just be slouched on a beanbag chair playing the game. And he was just as concerned with going into the UI and the HUD as he was with this particular dungeon or whatever. He was focused on user experience on the minute-to-minute basis.
You could walk in while he was there and ask a question. You could offer feedback. You could present an idea. And as he saw what worked and what didn't, and experienced the moment-to-moment gameplay, he was able to gain this invaluable experience and this perspective to say no to ideas, because he had the time and the luxury to sit back and see how all of these elements work cohesively together, to see what was fun, what was not, what impacted the moment-to-moment gameplay to make something that was worth spending time in. And it indeed was a luxury that he's not necessarily afforded anymore, as he's stretched across the Fallout TV show, across Indiana Jones, across Starfield, across the Elder Scrolls, across some Fallout projects, across the remasters. it's just too much for one person. And there's a bit of irony that the limitations put in place, whether it was the budget or the team size, are part of what necessitated creating a clearer and more focused vision for these projects that ended in arguably better products than what has released, since Bethesda has had larger budgets and larger team sizes. The limited resources meant you couldn't just go bigger for the sake of going bigger. It's one of the great things about a game like Expedition 33. It's part of what made a game like Skyrim as beloved as it is, despite being far from a perfect game. It wasn't trying to be a settlement builder, a space sim, a crafting survival light elements with a sandbox top, all in an open world at the same time. And if you had one of these creative ideas that you thought would make the game better, if you wanted to pursue it in your free time, you just had to walk to the desk of somebody that you knew and ask them to get on board with your idea and help make it come to fruition.
On something like, you know, the Dragon Priest mask, that was a pretty lightweight thing. It took me less than a week to put those together, and less than a week to get the designer to put them integrated into the game, or maybe a couple of weeks or something. But that was definitely like extracurricular activity, and so there was a couple of those going around at any given time, and it really just took you being excited, having an idea, and usually talking at least one more person into it, because if you can achieve collaboration between an idea, and especially between departments, you could make something interesting and unexpected happen, and you could do something that's bigger than just your own little addition.
But you can't even do that anymore because you don't know who you're working alongside.
A lot of these teams, they don't know each other. You know, there's so many that work in one building, and now there's multiple buildings all working in the same game. And so it really cuts down on communication, opportunity, and it puts a lot of onus on the people at the top that have a sense of what's going on. And you know, you're kind of bottlenecking a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential. But I remember I was walking around and I told my friends who I was visiting, I said, man, I don't recognize 70% of the people here, which made sense because I'd been gone for, at that point, like 8 years or something. And they said, yeah, neither do we.
And that's not even going on to mention that the people you did know may have gotten laid off by a company that was trying to trim and make more expedient and more agile teams, despite the fact that these CEOs aren't cutting their salaries. They're not trimming down their $1 million+ annual bonuses that they give themselves every single year. No, instead, they're laying off employees as they raise their own salaries. They're boasting to their shareholders about record profits that they're getting year over year, while saying games are too expensive, we need to raise it to $80. But you are too expensive, the already underpaid developer. You're too expensive to keep around. And I'm not sitting here trying to bash or make anyone who works at these companies feel bad for doing so. In fact, I have the utmost level of respect for these developers who go in and are incredibly passionate to work on, whether it's the IPs or the studios that they're working at, and pour their heart and soul into these products. I have the utmost level of respect. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that it's a miracle games get made at all, quite frankly. I'm just merely lamenting the dissolution of creativity as a byproduct of unsustainable growth that a lot of these companies are experiencing. It highlights a lot of why players are feeling disenfranchised by the AAA space, why we don't enjoy these games, because even subconsciously we're aware that there's such little risk that they're allowed to take, that they're formulaic. It's the same reason we look at the next Ubisoft title and go, all right, this looks cool, but I've definitely played it before. You can look at Marathon, which many have criticized as being completely uninspired, as a microcosm for the wider industry. It's a studio that's making a game that they don't fully understand, in a genre it doesn't feel like they actually want to work on, and in a style that reflects a lack of soul, probably because they stole it from an artist that they didn't attribute the credit towards. And it's no surprise that this mirrors the feelings that folks have when a lot of us play Starfield. That mirrors the feelings that Jonah, former developer, has when he looked at the trailers and looked at the gameplay for Starfield.
And Starfield, I didn't even play it. I honestly, it sounds harsh, but I see nothing of interest in it, and I don't know why it was made.
In the case of Bethesda, there's not one single thing that people can point to and go, if you just fix this, then all of your games will turn out great. It's a factor of many different variables. The fact that we have to ask whether or not Bethesda is geared to make the next great Elder Scrolls game is evident that there's a lot more here at play. But there's a few core concepts that are constantly repeated time and time and time again regarding the gameplay and the creative direction of Bethesda Studios. And the first part is the world, and not how it's populated just with the people, but with things as well, whether that's weapons and armors or dungeons.
I want to feel like the game and the world is real, that things make sense, are internally consistent, and they're built for me, that I'm going to get a narrative experience out of it. And I think that's one thing that made Fallout 3, Skyrim, and Fallout 4 a hit, is because they had, hardcore level designers who basically, you go into a dungeon, and even if there was no dialogue support, nobody said anything in the dungeon, you felt very much this dungeon was a place that had served a purpose, that, maybe it had been a bandit camp and now it had been taken over by spiders or whatever, whatever. You could infer a story.
Elder Scrolls and Fallout, these are worlds that you can live in, that you can go out and add your story to. No one's going to argue that they have the best, most world-shattering choice and consequence that any video game has ever had. If you go to a location in Fallout, it has a purpose. It's not just placed for the intention of giving the player something to do. It's put there because there's a reason, because it makes sense.
Skyrim was an actual place that they could escape to, and it gave them a reprieve from the real world. And so in my mind, that's the thing that separates it. It's not the gameplay experience. It is, because you're playing the game. It is that's it. But the feeling that this can go on forever, and you could just, you absorb yourself into these games, really comes down to a sense of location.
And that goes for not just the location of dungeons, but for the weapons and items as well.
It doesn't hold your hand at all, right? You barely have any idea what the hell you're doing in the world, or who any of these characters are. But that creates a sense of depth and of hidden storytelling. And you don't find the silver gloves of mythic burning, with that make you 5% faster, at this, and give you a 15%, bonus to this, whatever. They're all very specific things, and the same for Baldur's Gate 3. There's no randomly procedurally generated items. If you find a really cool item, that's special. You hang on to that.
These games aren't about grinding for the best gear, but somewhere in the creative process, there was a decision made that having randomized loot encourages player engagement metrics. But at what cost? When you go on a quest in Baldur's Gate 3, there's going to be some sort of payoff at the end. There's going to be an interesting NPC interaction. There's going to be a clever twist you didn't expect. You're going to get a cool piece of gear that you've never seen and you would never see anywhere else in the game. Reactions from characters about choices you've made along the way, and at its best, there might be a combination of all of these things. Expedition 33 and Kingdom Come Deliverance excel with wonderful writing and a gameplay formula that encourages exploration, because in both of these games, every corner, every location is there with intention. It exists for a reason, and we see in so many other games that have you churning out generic fetch quests or beating enemies that have no consequence whatsoever that you'll forget about within an hour probably, because at the end of the day, all they were was something for you to gain some XP from, something to get another skill point from, to level up a stat by 15% that you'll forget you even upgraded to begin with. Do you see how all of this can come together to feel formulaic, to feel algorithmic for player engagement and maximum player lifetime value? It's just not how games are meant to be made. It's not how games are meant to be played. It's a conversation that we've had so many times before. We've had it in relation to Starfield about making things wider, but not necessarily deeper. Expedition 33 didn't add in a settlement system, a camp building system, or have armor crafting. That instead the developers said, hey, let's just make sure that we give the players some really cool skills that actually behave uniquely from one another. The Pictos that you find in Expedition 33, they do provide boosts to some of your stats, but they also come with unique passives that might change the way you think about how you play each character. The top games of this year of 2025, Expedition 33, Blueprint, Split Fiction, it's not with or algorithmic formulas that are behind the success of these games, and it's not rocket science either. It's depth, it's creativity, it's empowered ownership of the products that are being worked worked on, not by a group of shareholders, but by the actual people who are on the trenches working day in and day out, making these things breathe, building their personality, bringing them life.
Design by committee rarely succeeds, and I think that when you combine the word procedurally generated with Bethesda, it's like an antithesis to me. It's like no, like the whole point of Bethesda games is to explore a world, and when you have decided that you're not going to build that world anymore, and that's a little bit too hard and like cumbersome, you no longer have a place worth exploring.
And what's a commonality between all of these experiences as well is that they challenge us in some way. They challenge us in the difficulty of the game. They challenge us in the morality that some of its writing presents. They challenge us in creativity about how we go about solving a particular problem. Or they challenge our curiosity to wonder what could be around the corner of this dungeon. What unique weapon, what unique story might be hidden under the layers that this game holds for me to uncover.
Elder Scrolls is like at the heart of the dungeon can be a Daedric quest. At the heart of the dungeon can be a sword. At the heart of the dungeon can be an even deeper dungeon, or a person you let free or whatever it is. So I don't know. I don't know why that happened.
They put trust in the player to figure things out, to experiment, to explore. They reward your curiosity. We've seen how that works with any FromSoft game. They aren't afraid to punish you again and again and again. As a result, these games achieve what most entertainment mediums can't capture, and that's making you feel a part of these worlds, making you feel more involved in these communities than you otherwise can. The other unique commonality between all these games is the lack of monetization in each of them. Even with Bethesda, there's a difference when you get to a title screen and you have the Creation Club menu item, you have a tab that pops up and notifies you there's new creations that we're promoting. You are reminded that you're playing a game. It's worth mentioning on the subject of Creation Club that conceptually it's something that I support. I think if there's creations like what King Gath does with something like the Bard's College expansion, something that feels like it's proper DLC to the game because it just has that level of quality, I'm fully for supporting that. But when 67% of Microsoft's revenue growth, 61%, was from recurring transactions alone after the Activision acquisition, how do you think that's going to pivot the way that Microsoft gently encourages similar monetization opportunities in other games? When Elder Scrolls 6 inevitably has one of the biggest marketing budgets Bethesda has ever seen, Microsoft, and by that I mean Microsoft shareholders, are not going to be satisfied with a single $70, or I guess in this case it's going to be up to $80 game sale. It's exponentially so when players are gravitating towards old games because they don't have the time or the budgets to jump into these massive experiences that don't respect the players as much as some of these $50 equivalent titles that are launching to much higher praise at that. It seems to be exactly what we're seeing. If you look at the player counts from Doom, they're incredibly low, and yeah, that's a more niche game, that fast-paced action first-person shooter, especially for folks who may not have played Doom 1 or Doom 2, even though it technically is a prequel to both of those games. It's launched to massively positive reception, but we don't see the player count. Why? Probably because you do have experiences like Oblivion Remastered or like Expedition 33, both of which are releasing to near universal praise and also have, guess what, that $50 affordable price tag. And it raises the question, what lesson is Microsoft going to take away from that? If it is deemed that Doom is a financially disappointing release, or is the studio going to walk away? Is Microsoft going to walk away saying, well, it's clear that single player games don't sell? Or, well, maybe if we added multiplayer or added microtransactions, or if it had some kind of battle pass system, then we would have gotten players on board with it. No. And yet it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if these corporate executives turned away from the release of Doom Eternal and said, well, Call of Duty's a first-person shooter and Doom is a first-person shooter, so why hasn't it drawn in the player counts and the money that that's making? And it's ironic that they would even entertain that conversation to begin with, that I would entertain the idea when we've just seen the release of Oblivion Remastered, a 20-year-old game that was released to a phenomenal player count as well as really positive reception. I recently made a video in relation to Oblivion Remastered that discussed how a 20-year-old title serves as a reminder that this level of attention and depth matters. All of that holds true to this conversation as well. And I think the worst thing that Elder Scrolls 6 can do in this situation is now double down on those things that make the product wider, but not necessarily deeper. Things like the settlement system or ship combat mechanics, or spanning across not one, but two continents, two provinces, because, well, bigger is better. Despite all of this, I'm still hopeful. And I think ultimately what I would hope to see from you guys in the comments or just from the broader community is that, yeah, while there is a level of skepticism and there is a level of worry about whether or not a good Elder Scrolls 6 is possible, all working to provide some level of constructive feedback that promotes how a great experience can happen. Doesn't just say, oh, well, Bethesda's dead and everybody left and they can't do it anymore. That doesn't help anyone. There's a lot of challenges in front of Bethesda. There's a lot of challenges that we've seen. There's a lot of challenges that they'll continue to go through that we probably haven't heard of and may never heard of. But ultimately, I hope, like myself, many of you can come together and wish for the best, that you guys can offer some constructive feedback of your own beyond just stating that the studio is dead and that there's no hope left and we should all move on. Because at the end of the day, all of us are gamers and all of us are looking to find that new exciting experience that we could all rally behind, whether it is a Baldur's Gate or an Expedition 33 or a Blueprints or a Split Fiction. The list goes on, and ideally within a couple years we'll be talking positively the same way about the Elder Scrolls 6. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. I look forward to seeing what all of you have to say, and as always, I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.